I like looking at lions when they're behind some sort of a barrier and I know that I'm safe, which makes the San Diego Zoo a great place to look at lions, although they're asleep most of the time. San Diego Zoo Safari Park is a better place. They've got more lions, more space, more time for them to roam around and do their thing, but they're also asleep a lot of the time. Now, one of my real dreams is to someday go on an African safari and to see them in the wild, but again, from a distance. So what brings them up close is my telephoto lens on the camera. Locked in with some hungry lions, no way of escape, no way getting out, that's not exactly on my bucket list. And that's where we find Daniel. We find Daniel in this den of hungry lions, sealed in tight, no means of escape, and it's not because he did anything wrong, it's because he insisted on doing what's right. Now, there's a lot of Christians throughout the world still today that face those same sort of challenges. Some are beaten, some are jailed, some are killed, some have their property and possessions confiscated or destroyed. And that's just because they're Christians who aren't trying to hide the fact that they believe in Jesus. And that's tough. Actually, if you want to find out more about what's going on in those sort of places, I want to encourage you to look at the website of an organization like Voice of the Martyrs. Their website is persecution.com. And you can go to that site, persecution.com, and read about that for yourself. I mean, the fact that that's still going on today is one reason that here at Concordia for the whole month of November, we're actually praying for persecuted Christians throughout the world. They need our prayers. And it's easier for us to forget that that sort of thing still goes on because, well, we don't have to deal with it. But we do have to deal with the fact that there are sometimes costs for standing up and doing what's right. Can you think of any? Well, how about being made fun of or ridiculed or marginalized just because you don't see things the same way the majority of culture does? What about getting funny looks when you pray over a meal? What about losing business because you won't do something unethical, or losing friends because you won't do something that they're all doing because it's not quite right, and then suddenly you walk into rooms and the conversation stops because, well, it's about you, or you stop getting those invites after a while. Or how about people in your own family? Making fun of you or giving you a hard time for believing in God or for going to church. Or how about what I might call opportunity costs? Like, opportunity costs would mean you're missing out on some activity because in-person worship is a priority for you. Or you have to wait to buy something you really want to buy because you've made it a habit to give a regular offering. Now, those are all costs that can come from standing up for doing what's right. And it's not just avoiding what's wrong. It's hard to keep doing what you know is right when you find yourself having to pay some of those costs if you do that. So here's the question for today. How do you do that? And how do you do that consistently? How can you keep doing what's right because it's right, and when every instinct is telling you, well, keep your head down because it's the much safer choice? Let's turn to Daniel's story from insight and direction. You're going to find that in Daniel chapter 6.
Darius the Mede decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces, and he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. The king also chose Daniel and 2 others as administrators to supervise the high officers and protect the king's interests. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs, but they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. So they concluded, our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. So the administrators and high officers went to the king and said, "Long live King Darius. We are all in agreement, we administrators, officials, high officers, advisors, and governors, that the king should make a law that will be strictly enforced. Give orders that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions. And now, your majesty, issue and sign this law so it cannot be changed. An official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked." So King Darius signed the law. But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room, with its windows open towards Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. Then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. So they went straight to the king and reminded him about his law. "Did you not sign a law that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions?" "Yes," the king replied. "That decision stands. It is an official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked." Then they told the king, "That man Daniel, one of the captives from Judah, is ignoring you and your law. He still prays to his God 3 times a day." Hearing this, the king was deeply troubled, and he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. He spent the rest of the day looking for a way to get Daniel out of this predicament. In the evening, the men went together to the king and said, "Your majesty, you know that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no law that the king signs can be changed." So at last, the king gave orders for Daniel to be arrested and thrown into the den of lions. The king said to him, "May your God, whom you serve so faithfully, rescue you."
So here's a little background on Daniel. Daniel was an exile from Jerusalem, who's now a slave in the land of the conquerors, serving people who didn't believe in God and who had a totally different worldview about what was right, which, well, it's not the best situation to be in. But God actually used Daniel and some of his friends in that not-so-good situation, and through their decency and their integrity, call that doing the right thing in the right way. Through that doing the right thing in the right way, Daniel and his friends actually had the opportunity not only to influence that foreign culture for good, but also to introduce some people in that not-so-God-friendly culture to God. And through those experiences, Daniel himself learned firsthand the things that he'd read in Bible. But he learned them firsthand through those experiences that, yes, God is really with his people, even in tough times and situations. And he learned that God was there helping them to do the right thing in the right way. And he learned that God was there protecting them from the worst of the things that evil could throw at them. But that faith was about to be tested again. And when we get to the events that you just read from Daniel chapter 6, Daniel's older now. He might be as old as 70, and he served several different kings in Babylon, and he served them all faithfully and distinguished. But now the Babylonians are out, and the Medes and the Persians are in, and there's a new king in charge. But once again, Daniel distinguished himself just like he had before. And the king, Darius, had planned to put Daniel in charge of a lot of stuff in his empire. Now that made others jealous, because they wanted those same positions, and they wanted to get rid of Daniel, not just temporarily, but permanently. So the first thing they tried was to find some dirt on him. But they couldn't find any dirt because of, well, Daniel's integrity. Let me take you back to verse 4. They couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. So if finding dirt's not going to work, well, then they're looking for some sneaky way to use Daniel's own integrity against him. And they're confident that if they can get the king to agree to something that they know Daniel won't do because of his integrity, that they could then get rid of him. Because, see, the way the Medes and the Persians did things, once they passed a law, they couldn't amend it or change it or repeal it. So let me take you back again to what's written about what they did. It's at verse 6. So these officials and satraps went to the king as a group. They said to him, "May King Darius live forever. All the officials, governors, satraps, advisors, and mayors agree that the king should make a statute and enforce a decree. The decree should state that for the next 30 days, whoever asks for anything from any god or person except you, your majesty, will be thrown into a lion's den. Your majesty, issue this decree and sign it. According to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no one could change it or repeal it." So Darius signed the written decree. Now here's the cleverness of the trap. All right, it's just for 30 days. It's not forever. Temporary, 30 days, king. Well, what could that hurt? And it appeals to the king's pride, right? For 30 days, king, you're a semi-god. If anybody prays at all, they pray to you. It's good to be the king, right? And the law wasn't outlawing other religions. It wasn't even forcing people to pray. It was just saying, if you pray, there's only one person that you can pray to, just for the next 30 days. King, for the next 30 days, you trump all other gods. Now that's going to appeal to the king's ego. It's also going to help him solidify his new rule. So that's appealing too. And since it's only 30 days, he sees that, well, it can't cause any lasting harm. So King Darius agreed to the law. Now, if Daniel's going to keep doing what's right, and in this case, that means if he's going to keep openly praying to God, as he'd been doing throughout this time in the land, it's going to cost him. And he knows it. But here's where it gets particularly complicated and challenging, even for people of integrity. You see, what's going on here is Daniel's choice isn't about not doing something wrong, like the bow down or else decree that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced in chapter 3. See, remember, Daniel here isn't forced to pray to Darius at all. He could choose for 30 days not to pray at all, at least not openly. Just take a break from his regular habit and his duty for safety's sake. So Daniel's choice is this. Will he keep openly doing what he should? Will I keep openly doing what I should and what I've been known for doing? When if I keep openly doing what I should, it's going to cost me. All right? That's a tough decision, isn't it? One that, well, you might find yourself facing too. So before we continue this conversation, take a few minutes to stop and think about how that connects with your life. Pause and reflect on this. Where are you faced with a choice or with some choices to keep openly doing what's right, even though it might cost you something to do that? Go ahead and hit pause right now. So you've thought about where you face those kind of choices. Am I going to keep doing what's right, what I've been doing, even though I know it's going to cost me? Well, here's Daniel's options in this situation. Option number one is, well, you can pray to the king, which Daniel would have quickly rejected because there's a clear word of God on that one. Have no other gods. His second option would be, well, to pray to no one, right? Just to take a little break from religion for 30 days. I mean, you could hear the self-talk. What's 30 days? What's the harm? People take breaks all the time. I mean, God knows my heart anyway. He knows I'm not really leaving him. I'm just playing it safe. I'm just blending in. I mean, can you hear the rationalization in that? And rationalizations usually, well, they seem to make sense. But watch out for that one. See, when you're trying to convince yourself of something, you usually end up arguing against your conscience, which is that thing in you that kind of instinctively knows what's right. And what I've learned is if something feels a little off, it usually is. Then there's option number 3. All right, he can pray to God, keep doing what he's been doing, but do it secretly. I mean, just quietly, in the heart, with eyes open, no posture of prayer, no kneeling down, no windows open so everybody could see, kind of like when you're driving along and praying, and nobody knows you're going to be praying to God. But because Daniel was known as a religious person who was openly praying to his God, Daniel's silence for those 30 days would have probably been seen by a lot of people as sort of a tacit approval of this law, and that would have called his integrity into question. And it would have opened him up into all sorts of questions that he couldn't really answer in any way that reflected well on either himself or on God. So then there's option number 4. Now, option number 4 is one that if he takes it, Daniel knows is going to win him an all-expense-paid trip to the lion's den. Option number 4 is to pray openly to God. Just like he's been doing all along, all these years, through all these different regimes, so that everybody can see what's going on. To openly and courageously keep doing what he knew he should be doing, even though he knew it was going to be costing him. Now that's what Daniel's opponents are banking on, and that's what Daniel did. Let me take you back into what's written, beginning at verse 10. But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room, with its windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. Then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. So what happened? Well, Daniel was thrown in the lion's den just like his enemies wanted, and they thought they were rid of him once and for all. Because when it's unarmed man versus angry, hungry lions, the lions always win. I mean, just ask the Christians who were thrown to the lions in the Roman Colosseum. What Daniel's enemies didn't count on was God. What they didn't count on was a God who is with his people. A God who can do what people say can't be done. A God who's strong enough even to close the mouths of lions. And so God delivered Daniel. And Daniel walked out of that lion's den alive and well, and with an even greater ability than he had before to influence that culture for God. Now, what I want to zero on here is this. What prepared Daniel to take that sort of a stand? What prepared Daniel to openly keep doing what was right, even though he knew that was going to cost him? Well, let me take you back one more time to Daniel's actions right after the king's new law got published to get some insight into that. Listen closely. But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with its windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. Now, and here's what I noticed there in those words. Daniel had this habit of daily prayer and worship. Right? Daniel made sure that he spent time, significant time, at least 3 times a day, with God every day. Now, why? Duty, obligation? Well, perhaps that duty and obligation kind of helped him get that habit of prayer set. But I think what the prayer and worship is about, the reason he did that so much, I think it was the relationship with God was important to him. And I think it's also because Daniel knew that he needed to lean into God consistently and regularly in a culture that was going in a very different direction. And I think it's also that Daniel kind of instinctively knew that those habits were a very practical way of living out the first commandment, which is put God first above everything. And here's what I think was going on in that daily prayer life, not because the text says, it doesn't, other than saying that he was giving thanks to his God, but because we also know some things about Jewish prayer life at that time. So I think it's not a stretch to say at all that Daniel's prayers included, first of all, this thanks and praise and worship of God. So that even as he's saying, God, like even as I'm praying for deliverance, God, I want to just praise you for this and this and this. I want to praise you for who you are. I want to thank you for what you've done here. I want to thank you for what I've seen you do for me. I want to praise you for these amazing things, because when you do that, not only does it honor God, what it does is has a way of kind of shrinking the problems down to size and reminding you of just how big God is and how much he cares for you and how much he loves you and how much he's with you even when life is challenging and you're facing tough choices. Now, I think there's also a prayer in that he's going to be faithful to God. God, help me keep doing the right thing. Help me keep doing the right things in the right way in this not so God-friendly land. And I think there's probably also a prayer there actually for the culture that he's living in. Because as I read through Daniel, I get the sense that Daniel is developing, a heart for the culture that he's in right there. Even though he's not agreeing with everything that they're doing, he's got a heart for the people and the culture. And so he's not praying that God's going to destroy this culture. I think what he's praying for is for the culture, that God would change it and that he'd use him and other believers for an influence for good and to introduce people to God. And then I think also he's probably praying some Bible. You see, what Jewish people memorized a lot of Bible. All right? And in Bible you have the record of what God's said and what he's done and how others have testified to that and to what God promises to do and how he promises to be with you. And you can include that in all your prayers, which again I'm sure Daniel was doing. I'm really sure that he was remembering and praying things like, Psalm 46, God, you're my refuge and strength and ever-present help in times of trouble. So be that for me. Like Psalm 50, verse 15, call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you will honor me. And as he's praying that, saying, God, be faithful to your promise. You've said you're going to call on me, and you're going to deliver me when I call on you. So do that. Joshua 1:9, be strong and courageous. The Lord your God is with you wherever you go. God, as I remember that story of Joshua, and I'm asking you to do the same thing for me. Help me be strong and courageous like he was. See, that's how you pray Scripture to God. Now, again, you face some of the same sort of things, don't you, sometimes in your life? The challenge of how do I keep doing the right thing when I know it's going to cost me? Do you want to be prepared for that? Well, if you want to be prepared for that, not only to not do what's wrong, but to openly keep doing what's right, even when you know it's going to cost you, well, take a few minutes to pause this conversation again and reflect on this. Number one, what am I doing to build a habit of regular worship and prayer into my life, into my daily life? And then write it down so you can refer to it and look at it and make some adjustments if you want to. Then, what am I doing to learn Bible so that I can include Bible in my prayer life? And again, write it down. And then, what am I doing to pray not just for myself or for other Christians, but also for the culture that I'm living in. And again, write it down. So what am I doing to build a habit of daily prayer and worship into my life? What am I doing to learn Bible so I can put it in my prayer life? And what am I doing to pray for the culture? Hit pause and reflect on that right now. Now, just like the story of David and Goliath or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it's easy to make this text into a morality play and make the moral of the story something like, well, be brave, like Dan. Have integrity, like Dan. Pray several times a day, like Dan. Do the right thing in the right way all the time, like Dan. All of which, well, they're good pursuits. But stopping there and make this simply a be better, be braver, pray longer type of a story makes the message of the story about us. And the main message of the story is really about God. So what does this story say about God? Well, from this story, I think we can learn, first of all, that our God is pretty consistent. That God is a God who rescues, who delivers, who saves. That God is a God who's stronger than evil, who's stronger than any of the enemies against us. And that if he chooses to give us victory over those enemies in our lifetime, well, he can certainly do that. God is with us, and God is for us. And God, there's absolutely nothing that can separate us from the love of God. God is completely and totally consistent in that. And this story of Daniel in the lion's den shows that again. It also shows us something else. We also see hints in this story of Daniel, hints of a greater rescue that's coming. It's 550 years or more in the future, but it's getting closer and closer and closer with every passing year. And I want you to just check out some of these connections here between what really happened with Daniel and what happened in Jesus' story. All right, like Daniel, Jesus was hated without cause, simply because he was light and the darkness hates being exposed. Like Daniel, Jesus was attacked by high officials and people in power. Like Daniel, Jesus was condemned by the law in a miscarriage of justice. Like Daniel, Jesus didn't protest or accuse his accusers in any way. Like Daniel, Jesus' enemies thought that when they rolled the stone over him, they thought they'd seen the last of him. But like Daniel, that wasn't the case. Now in Daniel's case, God rescued him from death by shutting the mouths of the lions, and when the stone was rolled away, well, Daniel walked out alive. But something even greater was necessary for God to rescue us. You see, the Father actually had to let the lions rip into Jesus and kill him dead. Because in order for us to be saved, Jesus had to die the death that we should have died. He had to take our place, and that happened on the cross. It happened on the cross where the lions, as it were, ate their fill on that one Good Friday. But 3 days later, when the stone was rolled away, there weren't any bones in there. The stone was rolled away, and Jesus walked out alive. Jesus walked out alive, and for anyone who believes that that's true, for anyone who received Jesus in their hearts as a living Lord who gave his life to forgive all of our wrongs, well, God's great rescue is accomplished. God did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all. And knowing and believing and trusting that that's true, well, that's how we act with integrity, like Dan. And that's how we act with bravery, like Dan, and that's how we can keep doing the right thing, even when we know it's going to cost, like Dan. It's not what's in us that makes the difference. It's who we know our God to be, and what we know our God is like, and what we know our God has done, and how consistent we know our God is, and that we trust that God is here with us and for us every step of the way, giving us the power and giving us the strength to keep doing the right thing, and to keep doing the right thing in the right way, even when we know it's going to cost.